The Korean Supreme Court has ordered Japanese companies to compensate Korean victims forced into hard labor during World War II in October last year. But the Japanese firms are yet to comply with the ruling, and this week, the Japanese government has officially requested arbitration involving a third country on this issue. On top of that, the Japanese government has rejected compensation lawsuits filed by Korean victims of wartime sexual slavery, according to local media outlets. Today, we go in-depth with Dr. Se-ryeon, professor at Kyung Hee University, on the strained Seoul-Tokyo relations and what we can expect ahead. Thank you for coming in today.
You're welcome.
So Japan has requested arbitration on the issue of wartime labor this week. And the move comes ahead of U.S. President Trump's planned visit to Japan this weekend and the G20 summit set for next month. How do you interpret the timing of this arbitration request?
Well, timing-wise, I look at it, you can look at it in both ways. One is that this story has been going on for a while. The victims have filed a lawsuit in Japan, they lost, and then they filed a lawsuit in Korea. They won last year, November, and then there was a seizure of assets of Nippon Steel company this January, and then the Japanese government asked for or demanded the diplomatic talk about that afterwards, and then now they're asking for arbitration. So if you look at it that way, it's a progression of that saga. But the second way to do it, look at it, is because, as you mentioned, diplomatic events that's coming up, there's a little bit of a posturing for Shinzo Abe to have some sort of claim against Korea and also have some agenda on the table. Probably third possible way of looking at it is it's a little bit of a domestic consumption, meaning that there is a possible fourth term for Shinzo Abe, and to bolster his the position, he has to appeal to the kind of right-wing sentiment of Japan, and this works well in that sense.
So the move was, the arbitration request, the timing was calculated in quite a few ways.
Right.
Japan is citing a Korea-Japan Accord that was signed in 1965 as basis for arbitration request. Could you tell us about this 1965 Accord and how it enables Japan to call for arbitration on the matter?
Right. 1965 Accord was necessary because there were a lot of treaties that has taken place, entered into during the Japanese annexation. So there was a need to annul many of those accords because that were not done in a legal way. But part of that is a language that says the governmental, the settlement regarding the subjugation and the forced labor and so on and so forth. So that's what Japan is basing on, at least in terms of language. And that accord also provides if there is a dispute on the matter that is subject to that accord, then they can go to arbitration and then go to International Court of Justice. But the operative notion is if the subject matter is subject to that accord. And now, Korean government has always maintained that personal claim, individual claim against the government or the companies are not subject to the government-to-government accord that they entered into in 1965.
Now, Japan's arbitration request follows Korean Supreme Court's ruling last year in which it ordered Japanese companies to compensate Korean victims forced into labor during World War II.
Right.
Could you give us a recap on what were the supporting arguments and evidence of the Korean Supreme Court's judgment?
Well, there's nothing strange to it. There is a victim because of the actions of Japanese government during the wartime and also the Japanese companies. So the victims have sued for compensation, and Korean court has accepted that claim. Now, the defense of the Japanese government has always kind of confuse the issue where they point to the language in the 1965 Accord to interpret that all the personal claims has been resolved with that accord, but which is simply is not true. And this is not just the Korean government's claim that the personal claim survives. It's also the Japanese government claim that this kind of situation, the personal claims, individual claims, that does not get resolved by the government accord. They have said this because they are in the receiving end on this 65 accord, but there are Japanese victims having claim against other countries in the Paris Peace Accord, and so basically against the United States and against the Soviet Union. In that situation, they maintain that in the similar situation, individual claims survives, and it's not addressed by the government-to-government claims. So they're by own admission, this defense that the Japanese government has probably would not survive in either arbitration or International Court of Justice.
Now, I was just about to ask you about Japan taking the issue to the International Court of Justice. It looks like Japan is actually now mulling to take this issue to global stage. How do you think Korea should handle the issue from this point on?
I think that the position the Korean government has is a correct one, which is to say that the arbitration or the diplomatic talks can interfere with the judicial process that is already taking place. So I think it's a correct position to abstain from mentioning or commenting or interfering with the judicial process. Now, if the Japanese government can show that the subject matter they are claiming is squarely the subject matter of that 1965 accord, then probably the Korean government has a responsibility to respond to that. But at this point, I don't think the Korean government has to respond to the demand for the arbitration.
Another wartime issue still unresolved is the compensation of Korean victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery. Korean victims and their families filed a lawsuit against the Japanese government in 2016, demanding legal compensation for their emotional and physical pain. And according to Japanese reports recently, Japan has flatly rejected the compensation lawsuit. Your thoughts on that?
Right. This is in a similar vein with the forced mobilization, the responsibility that the Japanese government and also the companies have been rejected and kind of squared over because of the 1965 Accord, which they at first did not really acknowledge that there was a application of the right by the individuals, but now they are. So I think that this is a position of the kind of a right-wing government that Shinzo Abe has been pushing for. I think the sentiment has turned because of that. The great contrast is between what the Germany is doing, where they're squarely acknowledging the guilt and the wrongdoing of their company and using that as a lesson from the history. I think for whatever reason, Japanese government has chosen to use myriads of excuses to kind of bolster the national pride, but that national pride should not be, kind of acknowledging that what they've done during the Japanese subjugation can be justified in any way. So I think it's a historically wrong move, and Korean government has repeatedly said that that is not the way to patch the relationship between two neighbors, and there has not been breakthrough yet.
Against such backdrop, the foreign ministers of Seoul and Tokyo will meet for talks tomorrow in Paris. Do you think the two will be able to come up with some kind of an agreement before tensions escalate further on the issue?
I'm a little bit pessimistic because of the gap between two positions, but if you look at it from a practical point of view, the claim amount is about $400,000. and a lot of the victims have passed away already. So from a practical point of view, this is a time to just come to some sort of understanding and admission of guilt or admission of responsibility, which will be good for the relationship between two companies and probably good for getting the lessons from the history that Japan has committed before. So that's our position at this point, but if they cannot agree on the small details like that, probably this spat will continue.
Another thorny issue between Seoul and Tokyo is the low flyby of a Japanese patrol aircraft, which
Right.
Seoul argues has prompted a South Korean warship to lock its radar on the plane. Now, taking the opportunity of the Shangri-La dialogue, which is Asia's security forum set to be held in Singapore next week, do you think perhaps the defense ministers of the two neighboring countries will be able to talk things out on that front?
Right. I think it's the same kind of story where needless, well, I wouldn't say needless, but the kind of the procedural differences between the two countries' military maneuvers have caused the problems that are blown out of proportion in my mind. Two countries and neighbors are not enemies. We should be working together in that sense. There has to be some operating procedures where both can resolve any kind of misunderstandings. But at this point, we maintain that we did not lock in our defensive radars, and the Japanese have maintained that we did. And as it did or did not, that kind of dispute has gone on too long, and during that time there were additional provocations. So at this point, I think that there has to be some sort of investigation that both parties can agree on so that we can put it to the rest. I don't think this is constructive for our relationship, and especially in the military cooperation that we might need going forward.
Now, diverting the topic a little bit, President Trump is due to visit Japan this weekend. What kind of requests or discussions do you think the two will share this time around?
Well, Japan has worried so far that in the discussion of Korean peace regime or North Korea and United States relationship, Japan has been conspicuously absent. So that's why they wanted to kind of push the issues of, for example, abduction of Japanese citizens to North Korea and so on and so forth. I think they're still looking for a seat in a table of negotiation. But Korea has not seen it. North Korea has not really needed the Japanese help. So I don't know what kind of argument that they will come up with. Probably they'll repeat the demand of some sort of resolution about the abduction of Japanese citizens, which is understandable. But in terms of having a weighty presence in the peace regime or the negotiations regarding the Korean Peninsula, probably all he can do is we are standing firm with the United States.
Now, as you've mentioned, Japan appears to be attempting to exert more power in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, what kind of diplomatic strategy do you think South Korea needs with that regard?
I think that the important thing is to kind of shoot for a situation where the neighbors, the Korea and Japan, do work together in terms of security, in terms of peace regimes, in terms of North Korea matters. So far, because of this little spats and distances that we artificially put on, we hadn't had any opportunity to really put on a concerted effort towards that direction. Now, like I said, we don't see the glaring hole that we can patch together, but I think that the basic stance in this region is that North Korea, China, and possibly Soviet Union, Russia, is pitted against this side, which is United States, Korea, and Japan. So there is a place that the Japan should take place, take hold, and that has to be there has to be a common understanding about what kind of peace regimes we do and what kind of economic cooperations we can put together so that the North Korea can look at it and say this is a good deal, either giving up the nuclear weapons, but on return there is a economic kind of a rosy pictures that involves United States, South Korea, and also Japan.
All right, Dr. Song, thank you as always for your insights tonight.
My pleasure.
And that does it for this edition of News in Depth. From all of us here at Arirang, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you right back here, same time tomorrow.